It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is another author, a returning guest, Marc Watson. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'm super happy to be here again.
Happy to have you. It's always a great conversation when we have you on. And the royal we. Yes, that's me.
Yes.
I'm royal. So as for your work and the sort of stuff you do, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, because the show is still growing.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, my name is Marc Watson. I'm a genre fiction author from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I have 3 releases out right now, one of which just came out in December, which is the second part of my Catching Hell duology. So that's Catching Hell Destination, which followed up Catching Hell Journey, which came out earlier last year. And then my first book, Death Dresses Poorly, released in December of 2017. I'm a happily married man with 2 young kids and a full-time job because writing doesn't pay the bills.
Yeah, making writing pay the bills is a challenging, but that's a difference. This is a story for another time.
Yes.
A challenge for another day.
I'd just like to remind all the writers out there that it's a slog, because sometimes you meet those overly optimistic ones and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, we have to break your spirit. I'm sorry.
Oh, I mean, writing can pay the bills if you really, really have the time to put into it. I think that's part of it, but
that is.
The time requirement is enormous to make a dent, especially in the independent world, I would say.
Yes, very much so.
Anyway, so as for your, so Destination just came out last December. Was it December?
Yeah, start of December.
Excellent. So December 2018, we had that book come out, and tell us a little bit about it, because Catching Hell it's been a project for you for a couple of years then.
It has. It was originally conceived as a single book, and as I sat down and wrote it over the period of about a year and a few months, and then editing afterwards, it kind of became this 5-year beast for me until I finally decided to focus and split it up and turn it into this duology. So in the first part, the 2 main characters, Aryu and Johan, are separated when their home is destroyed by a robotic army. And they both go off in their own direction to try and find their revenge in hopes of meeting up at the end. Well, in this one, they're still very firmly on their journeys, but the gap between them is starting to close, and they've both changed very much as young men. And one has gone to the world of the magical, the mystical, and that's Aryu, the man with wings. And then Johan has traveled into the world of technology, both of which were worlds that they were raised to fear because they are the catalysts of worldly destruction numerous times in the past. So their society has shunned them. So now they have to not only integrate themselves into this society, become comfortable with them, and then figure out how to use those to extract their revenge against their enemy. And that is Catching Hell in a nutshell.
Nice. You got that down now. I got to say, revenge is a powerful motivator. Not speaking from experience, though.
It's also, I mean, especially in genre fiction, it's a very common one too. Mm-hmm. It all depends on what kind of bent you put on it and make sure that it still stays. Like, anybody can just pick something up and just go, oh, it's another revenge story. And either you've hooked them by the time they realize that, or they're just like, I don't want another revenge story. So I really hope that I created something different. I created some characters that are more relatable and something different and unique.
Yeah, no, that it sounds like, I've had you on a few times now, so I'm like, now it's really getting in my head. Like, yeah, I really should pick those books up. I should take a look. Yeah, even though I don't. I just lack the time to read enough, and I'm so behind in my reading. I recently did a podcast interview with the Sci-Fi Shenanigans podcast, and and I think that'll be out by the time this comes out. But if not, it's still in the can. But it's recorded, and I felt so like, oh man, I don't read enough when I was in that podcast.
I feel that way a lot sometimes because I know that I don't read as much as some people, particularly writers, would think is required to be a writer. But it's not like I'm doing nothing.
No, absolutely. I'm only speaking for myself too. I'm just like, If I could finish reading more books, that would probably be a huge improvement to my just general well-being.
I don't feel guilty about it anymore.
Oh no, I don't feel guilty. I just think there's something about the finishing energy of reading a book that is very powerful, at least for me.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree.
It's a useful elixir to get occasionally, because you can't just keep starting them and never get there, you know. I mean, you can. No. I know how to do that, but finishing is a little better sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I got to make sure I'm committed. I got to make sure I can do it, and make sure that the time that I have is a reasonable amount.
Yes. I mean, ever since I got the Kindle, though, it's been just filling up. And anytime there's a book that's free, it's like, oh, that goes on the Kindle. And now it's just
wonderful.
Yeah, it's awesome. And there's so many opportunities out there. And then it's just so hard to get back to the same book. Yeah.
I've firmly embraced the ebook culture. I'm 100% on board with technology before it comes out. Usually before it's even tested. I'm usually a guinea pig for a lot of those kinds of things. But to be able to pick up I put it on my tablet and just open up Kindle on there, and to have all of these books at my immediate disposal, it's instantly comforting, because I know that I'm never going to be bored so long as I have it with me, or I have my phone with me if I need to. If I'm stuck on the train somewhere, or if I'm got downtime at work, I'm like, oh, I'm not really working on anything. Oh, I just pull out a book, and then I can start reading, especially things like short story collections and that kind of thing.
Yeah, short story collections are kind of getting this kind of renaissance now.
They are. It's wonderful. And yeah. I hadn't embraced it completely, but then I say that, and I've got something coming out in a collection soon, and I'm hoping to be in another one. I hope to hear back from that one soon. But the fact that I even wrote stuff and put it out there is just like, well, this is a train I want to get on board.
Oh no, yeah, no kidding. And for people who are going completely indie like me, I mean, it's just like, there are indie collections too now, and people want these things. These stories are there are places to put them that aren't just on their own, floating in space as little ebooks, you know?
Oh, exactly. And it makes it so convenient because they're put together, they're well edited. I mean, I haven't really come across one that's like, well, somebody just slapped together a whole bunch of stuff like a sloppy Joe. No, they're tight, and there's a lot of authors who maybe don't have the time to sit down and write the great American novel, but they had the time to write this 8,000 word wonderful short story, and they can get it out there. And it wouldn't have seen the light of day if not for a lot of the avenues that they have available to them nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of gets to the point, because short stories actually have an easier time finishing these days. Obviously, they're shorter; it's easier to do that. But when it's just the time thing, that's what keeps me from going back to the same book. Mm-hmm. But I do also find there's a quality that short stories have that kind of ties into the question that I wanted to ask today, which is just in general, what makes a book readable? And that question for me is kind of answered in a short story by saying there's going to be some kind of payoff. The payoff is worth it in a short story because short stories don't require a lot of time. There's not that much buildup, and the payoff can be extreme. It's like you can still torque out a really powerful ending, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
And in a lot of cases, especially in the science fiction genre, classic science fiction stories, like I'm blanking on some. I mean, on any that really fit this description, but there's definitely short stories. They have some kind of twist or, recontextualizing ending that changes everything. And those are the kind of stories that really, really work very well in short fiction.
I think Ray Bradbury did a lot of really good stuff in those shorter stories. A lot of the ones that he wrote really kind of stuck with me when I was younger. Maybe not super hardcore science fiction, but definitely... Yeah. Definitely enough that it stuck, and it was in that genre as well. So I think that's a great example of someone who I picked up and it just stuck in my head right away. But for short stories, especially now, if you can get yourself out into a collection, I mean, on one hand, it's easy enough to write it and hope that you made it punchy enough for the reader and that you're happy with your work. But on the other hand, if that's the only exposure that particular reader has to you, well, you better make it good, because if I, as a reader, although I'm not quite that cynical, but if I was to wear my cynical hat for a little bit, I would say, well, if this guy can't entertain me for 7,000 words, how's he going to entertain me for 70,000? Pass.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And that's the kind of thing that actually there's this kind of the 20 books to 50K group in the indie writer community. They talk there's this piece of advice that they talk about that these authors like Michael Anderle and Craig Martell and all these people, they talk about using, which is the write the beginning of a story. Don't do anything to clean it up, just show it to somebody and ask them, this is for the writing process, of course, and just ask them, does this make sense, or does this draw you in? Do you want to keep reading? And then only then do they write the whole novel in a lot, if they're just getting started on a series.
Yeah.
I think that's a really cool writing kind of exercise if one can use it. But go on.
Well, I was just going to say that I think it's a good exercise just in general, regardless of the length of your story.
Yes.
I mean, especially for a short story, because if you can give somebody the first 200 words and have them take a look at it and it hooks them right away and they want to know where it's going, that's good for no matter what the length is. But in a short story, they know that they don't have to read a whole lot more in order to get to the finale. They don't need to, it's not as much of a time commitment. You're more likely to hook them as a reader.
No, that's true. Yeah, I'd say that's a good point. And as far as expanding from short stories to novels, though, I do think it's kind of there's this kind of nebulous feeling that I get when I'm reading a book, which is that this book it kind of doesn't sit with me, or I just keep falling into it further. And and if I get stuck in a book, that's generally how that's how it happens. Like, okay, this is a book that I want to keep at,
Mm-hmm.
And how do you experience it when you find a book you want to read, or a story you really want to read more of?
I find it's very similar to when I'm writing something that I'm really getting into, where I will do just about anything in my power to get back to that story. I will, as I've said, I'm a busy guy, and by busy guy I mean I'm up at 5 o'clock, 5:30. I go to work or to the gym, start my work day. I'm home at 4 o'clock. My wife works evenings. Really what I'm saying is from about 5 o'clock in the morning to 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, I'm done. I'm not going to have a whole lot of time other than for my lunch. So if I am willing to take some of those aspects where I'm scrounging for free time, maybe I'm playing a video game or watching garbage on YouTube or Netflix shows or something like that, when I really am get into writing something, those things disappear and I move them to the side. And it's very similar as when I'm really into something that I'm reading, where the book travels with me all the time. A benefit of the ebook. There's been times when I'm sitting around at my work and I've got 5 or 10 minutes and I'm waiting for a meeting or a meeting room that's running long, and I just kind of got to sit there and twiddle my thumbs. Well, out comes that book. And when it's a really good book, it's that same feeling. It's that I am going to make it to the end of this as soon as I possibly can. And it gives a very similar sense of urgency. In my writing, I want to get there before I lose the story in my head. In my reading, I want to get there because I'm excited and I want to make it to the end of that journey. So very similar processes for me.
Yeah, I think I definitely see the parallel, and I think it makes sense. That makes sense for me as well. I mean, if I'm distracted when I'm trying to write something, there's no way I'm getting anywhere in that story, at least not at that point. If I'm thinking in terms of this is what I want to do to get this book out in the world, when I'm writing a rough draft, that's a really bad place to be. At least personally, for writing a rough draft, because I'm on a pretty quick timetable right now, but unless I just let time go away and just focus on the characters and the story and what's going on in the world of the story, well, then the story isn't happening and I'm not in it. And whatever comes out is not going to be as valuable, even if I do get it written, and I'm not likely to get as much out. So there you go.
And that always goes back to my writing philosophy of don't force it. Mm-hmm. Because if you had to force it to write it, then there's a stronger chance that I'm going to have to force it to read it as the reader. And nobody wants that. It's got to come organically. But if you're really motivated to do it and you want to get to the end of that, and just like I was saying a second ago, then that's the best place to be.
Yeah, motivation to read is actually way similar to motivation to write.
Absolutely.
Because especially, I forget, you do you discover or do you outline your work?
I discover.
Okay, yeah, me too.
I outline kind of the beginning of it. I mean, I have a large collection in my work in progress file of like the first chapter of things, and then I know where that story is going to go. And for something like for my first book, I just intended it to be like a short story, maybe a novella, and it turned into 45,000 words. And then when Catching Hell, I'm just going to write and see where this ends up, and it ended up at 250,000. I'm like, maybe I should have reeled that in a little bit, but that's just like, it was just that mentality. I just had to do it.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I definitely got that way with the book I'm currently editing. I'm turning it into 3 books because shorter books, whatever. But it took me about a year to write it. It was 150,000 words long in rough draft. And it's going to be a little longer total when I get it all out. But each book's about 60, 70,000, 50, yeah, something like that. And this was the year that I was doing all this freelancing and stuff. I wrote a few novels in the middle of writing this bigger novel that I was writing for myself. I wrote a few novels. I ghost wrote some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a weird experience because I was like, the ghostwriting was just like, oh, I hate this pretty much every day. Because that's why I'm not really cut out to be a ghostwriter anymore. But I never really was in the first place, as it turns out. So as I wrote that, and then but every time I finished one of those projects, feels like I would immediately, it would be maybe a day later, I'd go back to this other book that had been in the middle and been waiting for me the whole time, and it just really did, improve my I guess my love for the book that I was writing for myself at that point,
Oh, and when you have something like that, like for Catching Hell, it wasn't ghostwriting or anything. It was that I was in a job that was not mentally stimulating at all. And it was my escape. And I'd look forward to lunch when I could let my brain run wild a little bit. And that's why it meant so much to me. It was because I was so committed to it it was a dark time just in general. The economy was down, and I just grabbed the first job that I could. Now, thankfully, it turned into something bigger, and I'm still with that company. But it was an escape, whether it's from your ghostwriting or from work that's not terribly stimulating, which I guess in some cases could be the exact same thing. Then it becomes far more personal. But then you also really want to make sure that it's good, because you want it to be a worthwhile escape.
Yeah, and I think that goes for when I'm reading books too. I mean, I was like, I don't want to read a book that's just going to be. I mean, sometimes reading a book that's basically just brain candy is really useful. I mean, sometimes that's the best escape. But usually, I think at least I personally want my books to be a little more. I mean, I want them to be fun, but I also kind of find that to be readable, a book has to engage me on an emotional level. And maybe that makes me uncomfortable, right? That's okay. And that's one of those things I kind of struggle with when I'm writing books, because if I'm not writing something that I think is, if I'm writing something that I think is kind of intense and involving in a way that isn't, strictly, rainbows and sunshine, it gets a little weird. I'm like, is this going to work for people? I know people like to read all sorts of things. It gets interesting though in that way.
Well, one of the rules that I have is that you should never necessarily write for the reader. You want to write for the reader in that you want to make it readable and you want to make it enjoyable. But unless we are like just at a point in our lives where we can just churn out whatever we want just because we know that the reader's going to do it, most of us, I've talked to so many people with similar stories to yours and mine. It's a question of time. How much time have you got? Well, then you better make it worthwhile writing, and you better make a story that you would want to read. It's escapism for us. It's not a full-blown business yet, and bless you if it is. I mean, those are the luckiest of us all, I suppose. But
maybe
maybe it depends. Like, as you're saying, I've heard a lot of different things about freelancing and ghostwriting, where it just sucks the passion right out of really talented writers. So hopefully you never reach that point. But yeah, writing something for ourselves as the writer, that's the escapism. And then if there's a reader out there, all the better. And then that makes it feel that much better because somebody else shares this same desire for this story that you do, whether it's one person or 100 million people.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. I really like that. I think just that I guess it's what finding a reader really is finding, is getting somebody who connects with your fiction. It's not about, it's not even about numbers. You get them one at a time, like a lot of authors say that I hear online. How do you find readers for your books? One at a time.
Bit by bit. If there was a magic elixir, then everybody would do it, right? It's just like writing books on parenting. If there was a single answer, then this would be easy. And I have always approached the one at a time thing because I do write very much for myself. And when I find somebody that connects with, or just today I ran into an acquaintance of mine who was like, yeah, I finished your first book, my wife finished your first book, and we just had like a brief conversation about it. And I was just like, that is amazing. That is a wonderful thing. Now, did he buy it because he's a buddy of mine? And it's just like, oh, my friend wrote a book, so I should go check it out. And it's not that much on Kindle. Yeah, maybe. But he's also the kind of friend who probably wouldn't lie to me or blow smoke in my face about it if he and his wife enjoyed it, and they did. And I'm just like, well, there's one more reader.
Yeah, so, yeah, it's great. That's a good way to think, yeah.
And so now he's saying that he's grabbed Catching Hell's Part 1 and 2, which is a very different book from my first one, but he's still reading it and he's still smiling, so doing something right. So I'll just chalk that one up in the win column, and maybe it's a conversation that I have with somebody on Twitter, or an interaction that I have on Instagram, or just running into somebody when I'm doing some writing at the local coffee shop on my Fridays off. Those kinds of things, like, they all add up. And if you get one, I think that's a win, because that's one that you never had before, and then everything after that's just gravy.
Yeah, no kidding. And I can echo that sentiment. I mean, it's not easy sometimes being a writer, especially when I am trying pretty hard to get more notice on my books and stuff. And it's hard to see sometimes how little that what I do moves the dial as far as attracting more people. But I think the momentum hopefully will gather is kind of what I'm thinking.
It does. It's slow. I'm the same way. Like, what is the litmus test for when we are successful? Are we successful when we can live off of our writing, or are we successful when we wrote something in the first place? And everybody's going to have a different answer.
Or are we successful when somebody reads it? That's the interim step, really.
Yeah, that's the launching pad to all kinds of different possible scenarios.
Absolutely. So we have been talking kind of about reading and writing interchangeably here, but as far as recent books you've been up to, you got your nose in, that kind of thing. What's been entertaining you or involving you lately?
Well, lately I've only been into one or two, and a lot of that was me actually planning, because I was on vacation late last year and I was in Hawaii for a couple of weeks. I'm like, I'm going to pick myself up a book, and I know exactly which one I'm going to get. And there's a Calgary-based writer by the name of Ron Friedman, and he had a lot of success. He launched his first book about the same time that I launched Catching Hell Part 1. And the name of the book was Typhoon Time. It's very much a like Tom Clancy government thing meets Michael Crichton timeline. And I always say that Michael Crichton has a very obvious formula, a group of people fighting against some kind of science, not necessarily man-made. And that's exactly what this is, but with all the political bents of time travel, and because it was very much based on submarines and in the water and the ocean. And I'm like, I'm going to be sitting on the ocean for 2 weeks, and that is exactly what I want to read. And I so got into it. It was just like we were saying, like, I had a free moment, I was reading that book. If I'm not out swimming in the ocean or surfing with the kids, then I am sitting on my lanai reading that book. And it was so enjoyable, because ever since we lost Michael Crichton, I've never really found anything that's like Michael Crichton, and I've read everything that he did. So it was good to get that vibe again. Get that, yeah, I can enjoy this. It was a popcorn movie book, and I am so thankful for it. And I told Ron that it was everything I wanted it to be and more. And I really recommend it for anybody who misses Michael Crichton and kind of for that pseudo sci-fi whatever it was that he was writing.
Techno thriller, kind of.
Techno thriller, yeah, definitely. It's like it scratched a certain itch for me that I totally forgot about, and I was so happy for that.
Nice.
And other than that, it's mostly been short story collections and that kind of thing. As I'm trying to bone up on my short story skills.
Working on the short game, yeah.
That's it. That's how you win. You win with the short game. That's what they tell me.
Yeah. All right. So as for me, I have been noodling around on a couple things, but I did just pick up of all things Dante's Inferno. The epic poem, because I have been thinking about writing epic poetry just for the fun of it, and I am one of those nerds who does like to write poetry for the fun of it, for no real reason, because it's not the most marketable thing in the world, and I do it for fun. But I just think if I'm going to do a collection of short poems or something, maybe eventually I'll get one of those together. But an epic poem just kind of scratches the itch that the storytelling will in a different way, and I think that might be fun to do when I have free time. But I started reading this. Started reading the Inferno to get a bit of an epic poem in there, and I've never read it before, so that's kind of interesting. Anyway, yeah.
No, I read it. I read it back in high school, and I remember when I was reading it, like I was thinking I was edgy, and. I was thinking I was edgier than I actually was, and it's always been kind of something that I wanted to go back to, because I completely agree. And also I agree on the writing of poetry, because even if you don't plan on marketing it, even if you don't plan on putting it out there, poetry, I mean, there's not a whole lot of better ways to really learn how to refine your rhythm and your wording and just the craft of your writing than by doing it in something like poetry, because you are trying to take words and you're trying to turn it into something else. It's not just that you're turning it into a story. You're trying to sing a song with words in some way. And if you can master that, or even if you can just continue to work on that, I'm the same way. I'll always kind of jot something down if something strikes my fancy. Definitely not like Dante epic size, but it's a great way to try and improve your writing, for sure.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I did it a lot back when I was in college. Haven't written as much poetry since then, but it's just kind of got this. Yeah, there's just this amount of spending time with individual words, and not even necessarily sentences. It's words on lines, and it's almost the bare minimum of what you need to tell a story or describe something.
I remember thinking of it one time, whereas reading a story or reading like a book is like watching a movie, whereas reading poetry is like looking at a piece of art. We interpret it like just in a very short period of time. It's not something that requires a whole lot of thought sometimes, and other times it requires more thought than there is hours left in the day. So we can read that story and we can go along on that journey, but it's very self-contained, whereas poetry, it stands on its own and it's open to interpretation.
Oh, yeah. That's what's so great about it. Anyway, yeah, thanks for being on the show, Mark. This has been a lot of fun.
It has been.
Yeah, where can people find your work?
You can find my work on my website, www.markwatson.ca. That's MarcWatson. And you can also find me on Twitter at WriteWatson, WRITE, and as well as Instagram with the same handle, and on Facebook on facebook.com/MarkWroteABook, MARC. You can also find my books available from their publishers. Death Dresses Poorly is available from Fluky Fiction, and Catching Hell Parts 1 Journey and 2 Destination are both available from Double Dragon eBooks.
Awesome. Thanks for being on the show. As for this podcast, you can find us at mentalcellarpublications.com. You can find my books at amazon.com. And that name there is Tim Niederreiter. And Also, but if you really want to find the most recent stuff, that's the Pillar Universe series, Stormfleet. The Flame Wind should be out by the time this show drops. It's been delayed a little bit, but it's going to be out by the time this show's out. So this isn't really an announcement of a delay. This is an announcement that the book is out. You should go read it. And yeah, more to come. And yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good evening.
That tears it.